love Ori and the Blind Forest. The gripping story, the razor-tight platforming, the beautiful symphonic soundtrack. When I went to write down the script for this review, I was at a complete loss for words when trying to describe how much I loved the first game. However, I did have a few problems with the game. While my less critical problems will be discussed when comparing the first game to its sequel, my major problem was that the combat was not particularly engaging. I would in most cases jump over to a platform, spam X, then just carry on my merry way. I do appreciate Moon Studio for adding in some abilities to make the combat more enjoyable. The bash, lob, ground slam, and energy blast all made the combat fun once I acquired them. I found myself only using the bash as a form of attacking, turning the combat into a game of, hey, let's find some spikes to launch this enemy into, which I will admit is actually quite fun, but that is my problem. The combat didn't become enjoyable or engaging until I acquired those abilities. When I first started the game, I was very skeptical of the combat, which was me pressing X and this floating turret attacking my enemies. I imagined this would turn off many Metroidvania fans when they started the game. While on a combat level, the game wasn't too impressive, it really delivered in its platforming. The movement was so smooth, so tight, so cleverly implemented that I consider it on par with the movement in Celeste and Hollow Knight. Making abilities that add extra layers to the platforming is impressive. What is more impressive is implementing sections into the platforming that require careful use of these abilities. I found myself having to use multiple abilities in rapid succession. Again, I have only seen this type of implementation in Celeste and Hollow Knight. For the sake of time, I will stop rambling now and move on to the sequel. Almost as soon as the game started, I was thrust into this brand new world. New areas, new abilities, newish enemies, but I'll get to that later. But most importantly, bosses. The story wasn't particularly unique, but the method in which it is told is what makes it so gripping. You have Moki, lemur-like creatures, hiding in bushes until they recognize your character as a potential savior. Petrified creatures, large bones of dead owls, decaying plant life, spikes made out of bug carcasses, wings still twitching. Trees of light, a craftsman trying to make a village a better place, a seagull-like creature making sarcastic remarks on everything, a map maker devoted to his profession, a gardener that will gladly plant any seed you give him. The game is showing light in an otherwise dark world. I appreciate the addition of characters I can talk to, adding more life to the game. The game starts off feeling very similar to the first in terms of progression in areas. One of the first things you do is try to get water flowing again, almost exactly like the first game. But after that, the game just takes off. There's a desert area, an underwater area, a winter forest where I would have to light little furnaces to thaw platforms, an area reminiscent of Deep Nest, with a mechanic that made it I would have to stay in the light. Moon Studios has ramped up the movement considerably from the first game. It still has that flowing movement that made me fall in love with the series in the first one, but with the addition of several new abilities. You still have the bash, which never gets old, but now you can drill through sand, dash through water, grapple onto bulbs, turn yourself into a projectile. Come on, how are you not already playing this game? But one of the big changes I noticed was in the combat. Now you have a sword, mace, which I love way too much, and bow, among other weapons. I found myself not using many of the other weapons that much, but it was just because I loved the mace way too much. The combat now has the same beautiful flow as the platforming. I was finding that I could go from attacking to dashing or using a bash or grapple in a fraction of a second. The combat also had a weight to it I greatly enjoyed. When I hit an enemy with my sword, they would stagger as a light sparked off of them and my controller vibrated. When I swung my mace, I would find enemies would go flying, which is why I loved it so much. This brings me to the next topic. Enemies. There are some old enemies from the first game. There are still the slugs that shoot diverging projectiles, the bads. But there are also a bunch of other new enemies. Beetles, tunnelers, crabs, mosquitoes, these other two enemies I don't really know the names of. Before I move on to my final point, I would like to give a shout out to Moon Studio for adding in quick saves. It got very irritating to have to keep using energy to manually save the game. Sure, it was nice to be able to save in the middle of a hard platforming segment or after a large group of enemies, but it became very tedious to have to keep saving and keeping an eye on how much energy I had. So thank you, Moon Studio, for getting rid of a headache. Now for one of my final points. Bosses. The first game didn't have any, mostly due to a lack of a combat system that would permit them. There aren't many bosses in the game, but the ones there are so good that they make you wish each area had its own boss. Most of them have some clever mechanics that were being subtly taught to you using the area and the enemies in it. I know what you're going to say. This game is just ripping off Hollow Knight. Unfortunately, you are absolutely right. Ori 2 is still its own game with its own mechanics, but it was very obvious in some mechanics of the game that Phil Spencer was over at Microsoft headquarters slamming on his desk, demanding Moon Studio to get him more Hollow Knight gameplay. This becomes apparent with spirit shards, aka charms, and life and energy cells now require multiple fragments, vaguely similar to mask and soul shards. It's just a shame because I feel that the parts that weren't copying Hollow Knight were actually done amazingly well. I didn't dislike spirit shards, but some of them were simply more drops, which is just not interesting. I will admit though, some were cool. One let you wall climb, one let you triple jump, one made you take and deal more damage. The overall gimmick smells of Hollow Knight cloning, but the execution, save a few, actually ended up being pretty well done. Plus, it legitimized having combat shrines to earn more room to equip them. I feel that with mechanics like these, Moon Studio did the best they could to spice them up in some way. Other than the slight hiccup of copying some of Team Cherry's homework, I could not find any other major problems with this game. It is genuinely a great game. When you take out the few mechanics that mirrored Hollow Knight, it is very close in quality. Through its own merits of excellent flowing platform and now the addition of combat, gripping story, vibrant setting, and memorial encounters, this game has managed to get on my list of all-time favorite games, which is a very short list, mind you, especially for the price of $30. I would absolutely recommend this game to anyone.